Have you ever wondered why the very thing a man cannot let go of is often the very thing that destroys him? Welcome to the library of thoughts. If the depths of the human psyche fascinate you, make sure to support and subscribe, because here we unmask the shadows that govern desire, power, and the archetypes of love. Obsession is not love. It is love's distorted shadow, swollen and swollen again until it consumes the soul. Jung taught that what is not made conscious returns as fate. When a man cannot confront his own inner emptiness, he projects it outward, fastening his need upon a woman as though she were his salvation. To him, she becomes more than flesh. She becomes the vessel of every unconscious longing he has buried, every unhealed wound, every denied piece of himself. And so he clings, unable to escape. But what he does not realize is that his fixation is not truly about her. It is about his inability to face the void within. He believes he desires her, when in truth he is haunted by his own shadow, the neglected parts of his psyche now wearing her face. In Jungian terms, this is the anima projection. The inner feminine he refuses to reconcile within himself, now embodied in the woman he obsesses over. He does not see her as she is. He sees her as the mirror of all he lacks. And here is where you, the woman, must sharpen your awareness. His hunger for you may feel intoxicating, even flattering at first, like being bathed in a fire that never dies. But soon you will notice it is not you he sees. It is his dream of you. His demand becomes bottomless, because no real woman can fill the abyss of a man who refuses to meet his shadow. The more you give, the more he starves. This is why Jung warned of the dangers of projection. It turns the beloved into a battlefield of someone else's unconscious wars. When obsession grips him, he is no longer choosing love. He is possessed by the very forces he denies. And possession, no matter how passionate, is not devotion. It is bondage. For a woman standing in her power, this truth is vital. If you allow yourself to be defined by his gaze, you too become entangled in his shadow. You lose yourself in his hunger, mistaking it for love when it is only need. But if you see with clarity, you can step beyond the spell. You can recognize that his inability to let go is not proof of destiny. It is proof of his unhealed soul. And perhaps, just perhaps, this recognition becomes your liberation. Because once you understand that obsession is not about your worth, but about his wounds, you stop mistaking his chains for your crown. You begin to see what he cannot, that true love is not possession, but freedom. Obsession grows like ivy around the walls of the soul, feeding on cracks and fractures, tightening until even the strongest man feels suffocated. The more he tries to hold, the more it strangles. Jung spoke of the shadow as the place where all unclaimed parts of the self are, stored, the fears, the desires, the shame, the rage. When these remain buried, they do not disappear. They leak, they twist, they fasten themselves to another. And when that other is a woman, she becomes the unwilling carrier of everything he cannot confront. Think of how it unfolds. A man sees her, luminous, unshaken, radiant with her own fire, and something inside him stirs. He believes he has found love. But beneath that spark lies a deeper tremor, envy of her freedom, hunger for her wholeness, terror at the possibility of losing her. And so his love mutates into obsession, not because she has changed, but because he cannot bear to meet the shadow she awakens in him. He wants her not as she is, but as the balm for wounds he refuses to touch. For you, the woman, this dynamic can be both intoxicating and dangerous. At first, his obsession may look like devotion. He watches, he remembers, he clings to every word. You feel seen, chosen, held at the center of his universe. But then the weight grows. Every step you take becomes a threat to him. Every silence is interpreted as rejection. His eyes demand more than your presence. They demand your soul. He asks without words, "Be what I cannot be. Carry what I cannot carry. Fill what I cannot fill." Yet here lies the paradox. The more you yield to his hunger, the weaker he becomes, because the shadow cannot be fed from the outside. You could pour yourself into him endlessly, and still he would return, hollow, needing more. His prison is self-made, and unless he turns inward to confront the hidden wars raging in his psyche, he cannot escape. This is where the wisdom of the Stoics converges with Jung. Seneca warned that the man who depends on another for his peace is forever enslaved. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's worth is measured not by what he clings to, but by what he can release. Obsession is the opposite of release, and it is grasping, clenching, suffocating. And in that suffocation, love suffocates too. But remember this: you are not required to be the keeper of his shadow. You are not required to burn yourself so that he may find light. Jung would tell you that your task is individuation, to live so fully within your own truth that you cannot be reduced to anyone's projection, to love with clarity, not with chains. And so, the question becomes not, why can't he let go, but why must you? Because true empowerment comes not from being the object of obsession, but from stepping outside it, refusing to let another's hunger define your worth. When a man is seized by obsession, he often mistakes it for love's highest proof. He says he cannot live without her, that she is his reason, his world, his oxygen. Yet Jung would remind us, such words do not arise from love, but from possession. Love breathes, but obsession suffocates. What he worships is not the woman before him, but the reflection of his lost soul shimmering in her presence. He grips it, desperately, because to release her would mean to face himself. And the self is the most terrifying adversary of all. In this theater of shadows, she becomes both muse and mirror. She is placed on a pedestal, raised so high she is no longer seen as human. The danger in this pedestal is not only his blindness, but hers. Because when you, as a woman, are adored in this way, you risk mistaking projection for truth. You begin to believe his gaze defines you, that his inability to let go is proof of your power, proof of your beauty, proof of your irreplaceability. But in reality, it is proof of his wounds. Obsession is not about your light. It is about his darkness. He clings because he fears abandonment, because the mother wound gnaws at his psyche, because somewhere deep inside he believes he is unworthy of love unless he possesses it fully. These ancient traumas, left unexamined, take root in the present moment, wrapping themselves around you as though you were both healer and savior. But you are neither. You are simply a woman, breathing her own breath, walking her own path. Here, Jung's idea of individuation becomes your shield. Individuation is the journey of becoming whole within oneself, of integrating the shadow rather than projecting it onto another. For him, obsession is the refusal of that journey. For you, empowerment is the refusal to carry it on his behalf. You cannot be both his cure and your own. And if you try, you will find yourself slowly erased, dissolved in the quicksand of his need. This is why the Stoics, too, remind us, nothing outside of you should hold dominion over your soul. Epictetus declared that if you make your happiness dependent on another, you become their slave. How many women have chained themselves to men's obsession? mistaking those chains for bracelets of gold. How many have given their freedom, their laughter, their dreams, all to soothe a man who cannot soothe himself? But obsession can only hold power over you if you forget the truth. You are not the shadow he projects. You are not the balm for wounds you did not cause. You are not proof of his worth. You are the keeper of your own flame. And the more fiercely you protect that flame, the less his darkness can consume you. For the man, escape is impossible until he turns inward, until he dares to look at the face of his shadow and claim it as his own. For the woman, the path is different. It is the choice to step away from the battlefield of his unconscious wars and stand in her sovereignty. The obsession deepens like a fever when left unchecked. At first it flickers as longing, then blazes into possession, until every corner of his mind is marked by her name. To him she becomes myth, a symbol more than a woman. Jung saw this clearly. When the anima, the inner feminine, is disowned, it rises in projection, and the man mistakes the outer woman for the lost parts of his soul. He binds her to his unconscious, turning her into the vessel of his unfinished becoming. This is why he cannot escape. For how does one flee from his own unclaimed depths? And yet, in this story, the woman holds the quiet power. She is not powerless to his obsession, though at times it may feel suffocating. She has a choice, to be consumed by his shadow or to step beyond it. Too often women fall into the illusion that his intensity equals devotion. The way he stares, the way he clings, the way he pleads, it feels like proof that she matters. But does she truly matter to him? Or is she only the canvas upon which he paints his desperation? There is a profound difference between being loved and being needed. Love sees the other as they are, whole, sovereign, free. Need sees the other as an extension of the self, a patch for the broken places, a drug for the emptiness. When his obsession masquerades as love, he does not honor her sovereignty. He devours it. And the more she bends to satisfy him, the more his hunger grows. This cycle is not merely romantic, it is archetypal. It echoes the myth of Narcissus, entranced not by love but by his own reflection. He drowns in the image, unable to separate himself from the illusion. So too does the obsessed man drown in projection, unable to see the woman beyond the shadow he has cast upon her. And if she is not vigilant, she too can drown, swallowed not by his love, but by the loss of herself. This is where you, the woman listening now, must awaken. You are not his mirror. You are not his cure. His inability to let go does not elevate you to goddess. It reveals his refusal to descend into himself. If you mistake his chains for love, you will forget your own freedom. Jung wrote that the shadow, once faced, is the doorway to wholeness. But until he dares to face it, you must remember, you are not required to stand guard at the door of his soul. And what of the Stoic lens? Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. The obsessed man has abandoned this truth, giving all his power to another, but you, as the woman, can reclaim it. You can choose not to be consumed by the storm of his projections. You can choose to walk in clarity, in strength, in the knowledge that your worth is not measured by how tightly a man clings, but by how brightly you stand when he lets go. When obsession reigns, time itself bends under its weight. Hours stretch into eternities when she is absent, and minutes feel like torment if her attention falters. He lives not in reality, but in the prison of anticipation, his mind tethered to her presence as though she were both compass and cage. Jung understood this as the collapse of the psyche into possession. When the unconscious swallows the conscious, a man no longer acts, he is acted upon. He becomes a puppet of the forces he has denied, and the strings are pulled by the very shadow he refuses to face. But obsession is not only destructive to him, it is corrosive to her. Slowly, subtly, she feels the weight of his gaze pressing upon her shoulders. Every movement is scrutinized, every silence interpreted, every boundary tested. What once felt like passion becomes pressure, as though her freedom itself is an offense to his hunger. And here lies the hidden cruelty. He does not want her as she is, he wants her as he imagines. He wants her to shrink into the role he has crafted, healer, savior, eternal giver, while his wounds remain untouched. This is the archetypal trap of the anima projection. The woman becomes the vessel of what he will not hold. But the greater danger is not his blindness, but her forgetting. For if she begins to confuse his need with her worth, she will start to bend, to contort, to make herself smaller so that his obsession does not shatter. She may even begin to think, if I love him enough, he will heal. If I stay, he will change. Yet Jung and the Stoics alike warn against this illusion. Seneca spoke sharply, "He who is brave is free." And freedom does not come from surrendering oneself to another's chains. Ask yourself, woman listening now, what is the cost of becoming his shadow bearer? How many pieces of yourself will you scatter, trying to fill the abyss he refuses to face? How many dreams will you silence so that his hunger does not grow louder? The truth is simple, though it stings. No amount of your love will mend what he has sworn not to face within himself. The man cannot escape because he refuses the descent into his own psyche. The woman can escape, but only if she chooses clarity over fantasy, sovereignty over entanglement. Individuation, Jung's great path, is not only for the man, it is for the woman who dares to see clearly, who refuses to dissolve into the storm of another's projections. It is for the woman who learns that love is not measured by how much of herself she surrenders, but by how much of herself she protects. Remember this: obsession thrives in the absence of boundaries. But when you, in your strength, draw the line, you turn the mirror back upon him. And whether he chooses to look or turn away, that choice is no longer yours to carry. The shadow of obsession is not silent. It speaks in whispers, in demands, in subtle manipulations that dress themselves as love. "Stay with me," he pleads, "for without you I am nothing." And yet beneath those words lies a darker confession. I refuse to face the nothingness within myself. Jung would say this is the refusal of individuation, the denial of the heroic descent into one's own depths. The man who cannot face his shadow will instead chain another to it, believing her presence will keep the darkness at bay. But shadows cannot be exiled through another's embrace. They only grow stronger, feeding on every attempt to ignore them. This is why his obsession intensifies over time, not diminishes. The more he grasps, the more he fears losing, and the more he fears losing, the tighter he clings. It is a spiral that narrows until both suffocate, he in his hunger, she in her erasure. And yet, for the woman, this is the crucible of empowerment. Here lies the threshold where she must decide. Will she descend with him into the pit of his denial, or will she stand at the edge, firm and unmoved, letting him face himself or fall? Too many women mistake their compassion for a duty to heal. They confuse empathy with sacrifice, believing their love can carry the weight of another's unresolved pain. But Jung reminds us, each soul must walk its own path of integration. No one can descend into another's unconscious and return intact. When she remembers this, her perspective shifts. She no longer interprets his obsession as proof of her divinity, but as evidence of his disunion. His desperation ceases to flatter her. It becomes a warning, and in that recognition, she steps into her sovereignty. She understands that true love is not a man saying, "I cannot live without you." True love is a man saying, "Even without you, I remain whole, but I choose you still." The Stoics echo this wisdom. Epictetus taught that to depend on another for your peace is to surrender your freedom. Obsession is precisely that surrender, the abdication of inner authority. The obsessed man has forfeited his inner kingdom, offering it at the feet of the woman, and then demands she govern it for him. But a woman, standing in her truth, refuses the crown of another's abdication. She rules only her own realm. For her, liberation is not coldness, but clarity. It is the fierce knowing that her worth is not magnified by a man's inability to let go, but by her own refusal to be consumed. She becomes like the flame, beautiful to approach, impossible to possess, demanding reverence by her very nature. The obsessed may try to cage her, but cages only dull the fire, never extinguish it. And so she walks the path of the empowered, aware, awake, unchained. If he remains trapped in his shadow, that is his fate. But hers is different. Hers is to rise, to embody the archetype of the woman who will not bow to obsession, but will choose only the love that breathes, not the hunger that devours. There is a haunting irony in obsession. The very thing he believes will secure her presence is what drives her away. His grip, meant to hold, becomes a vice. His intensity, meant to prove devotion, becomes suffocation. Jung saw this paradox as the tragedy of projection. When a man projects his inner void upon a woman, he does not bind her to himself. He binds himself to the endless cycle of disappointment. For no woman can embody his lost anima fully. She is human, not a dream. She breathes, she falters, she changes. And each time she does, the illusion crumbles, and his obsession tightens in panic. The woman, meanwhile, begins to feel the silent erosion. The air grows heavy in his presence, as though every glance is a weight, every question a demand, every gesture a test. She senses that she has become less of a partner and more of a lifeline, expected to carry what he cannot, to soothe what he will not soothe within himself. And here she faces the most dangerous temptation, to believe that her worth is proven in how much she can save him. But to save him in this way is not salvation, it is self-betrayal. For Jung, the shadow was not an enemy to be defeated, but a truth to be embraced. Until the man turns toward his darkness, until he learns to hold his wounds with his own hands, no woman's love will suffice. His obsession is not proof of her value, but evidence of his refusal. This is why he cannot escape. He is chained not to her, but to himself. And here, woman, is your moment of awakening. You were never meant to carry the fragments of his psyche. You were never meant to serve as the endless mirror of his need. You were meant to stand in your own radiance, whole and sovereign. The more you recognize this, the less you mistake his desperation for love. Love does not consume. Love does not chain. Love expands. The Stoics reinforce this truth with piercing clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If his thoughts are of possession, of fear, of scarcity, his soul will be stained by obsession. But if yours remain anchored in freedom, in clarity, in the knowledge of your worth, No projection can taint you. You are not his savior. You are your own sanctuary. This does not mean the woman must harden or grow cold. On the contrary, it means she must love with boundaries, with discernment, with the fierce recognition that her flame must remain hers first. Compassion does not mean captivity. Empathy does not mean erasure. True feminine power is not in surrendering to another's darkness, but in holding her own light so strongly that it exposes the illusions for what they are. And when she stands in that power, the shadow is revealed. His obsession no longer binds her, because she sees it clearly, not as proof of her divinity, but as a summons he refuses to answer within himself. She does not bend to it. She does not break under it. She simply refuses to mistake it for love. The deeper one studies obsession, the clearer its true shape becomes. It is not desire. It is dependency. It is not devotion. It is fear disguised as longing. Jung warned that when the unconscious rules unchecked, it forces itself onto others, demanding they carry what the psyche has abandoned. That is why the obsessed man does not see the woman. He sees his mother wound, his childhood neglect, his unhealed shame, all painted upon her form. He is not loving her. He is clinging to his reflection in her eyes, begging her to hold what he cannot bear to touch. For the woman, this is the crucible of awakening. Every day she remains in that fire, she feels the cost. Her silence becomes currency. Her freedom becomes dangerous. Her joy becomes ration. His shadow demands that she prioritize his wounds over her own wholeness, his needs over her boundaries, his fears over her truth. Slowly, she begins to vanish until one day she asks herself the question that splits the illusion open. When did I stop being me and start being his lifeline? This moment of clarity is sacred. It is the first step toward individuation for her. The same process Jung insisted belongs not only to men, but to women, perhaps even more fiercely. Individuation demands that she reclaims the fragments of herself she gave away, that she recognizes she was never born to carry another's unconscious. The shadow work is his task, not hers. But obsession resists this truth. The man gripped by it may grow frantic as she begins to withdraw her energy. He may tighten his grip, plead, rage, manipulate, anything to keep her bound. And here she must remember the wisdom of the Stoics. Freedom is the highest good. Seneca declared, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." To be everywhere for him, healer, savior, mirror, mother, is to be nowhere for herself. Love cannot live in such an atmosphere. What masquerades as love is only control draped in poetry, fear dressed in adoration. A love that suffocates is not love, it is bondage. A woman who mistakes it for devotion forgets that her soul was never meant to shrink. And so, the path of empowerment demands detachment, not the detachment of bitterness, but the detachment of clarity. To walk away from obsession is to reclaim the self. It is to look at his chains and refuse to wear them, to see his hunger and refuse to confuse it with truth. It is to step back into one's own body, one's own voice, one's own breath, and whisper the most liberating words a woman can say. I am mine first. For the man, obsession can become the doorway to awakening, but only if he accepts the mirror she no longer holds for him. For the woman, empowerment comes when she ceases to mistake obsession for fate and recognizes it for what it is, his unhealed shadow, not her crown. Obsession is a storm without a horizon, and the man caught within it circles endlessly, convinced he is chasing love, while in truth he is fleeing himself. Jung saw this spiral as the psyche's refusal to integrate its shadow. Until the man accepts that the darkness he fears is his own, he will continue to cast it onto the woman, binding her to the role of both muse and scapegoat. He cannot release her because releasing her would mean reclaiming the exiled parts of himself, and nothing terrifies him more. For the woman, this storm feels both intoxicating and suffocating. She is placed at the center of his world, elevated to a throne she never asked for. He worships her, yes, but worship that does not see the human beneath the crown's not reverence. It is illusion. An illusion always extracts its price. She begins to feel the cracks, the way her laughter becomes a trigger for his fear of loss, the way her independence is met with silent punishment, the way her boundaries are tested until they fracture. What once felt like passion reveals itself as prison. It is here that the deepest shadow work of the feminine begins. To step out of his projection requires courage, for leaving his obsession often means being cast as a villain. He will accuse her of betrayal, of coldness, of abandonment. Yet Jung reminds us, the shadow always seeks to blame the other for what it will not own. His accusations are not truth. They are the cries of a man who cannot face himself. If she bends beneath them, she forfeits her soul. But if she stands firm, she claims her sovereignty. The Stoics spoke of this sovereignty as the ultimate discipline. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nothing is more freeing than to hold power over one's own mind. The obsessed man has surrendered that power. He has given it to her, demanding she wield it for him. But the woman who is awake refuses to be his keeper. She knows her worth is not defined by how much she is needed, but by how deeply she remains rooted in herself. And so she draws the line, not with cruelty, but with clarity. She does not scream, she does not plead. She simply stands unwavering and refuses to let his shadow become her cage. In that stance, she performs the highest act of love, not toward him, but toward herself. Because to love herself enough to walk away from obsession is to honor the divine fire within her, the flame that was never meant to be smothered by another's hunger. And here, something extraordinary happens. His shadow, deprived of projection, turns back toward him. He may rage, collapse, or numb himself in denial, but the truth remains: the mirror has been removed. He must now face what he once avoided. Whether he does or not is his choice. But she is free. Free to walk in her light. Free to choose love that breathes instead of binds. Free to embody the archetype of the woman who will not be consumed. The end of obsession feels for him like death. Jung wrote that the ego resists transformation as though it were annihilation, because in a way, it is. When the woman withdraws from his grip, when she no longer serves as the vessel for his projections, he feels as though the ground has vanished beneath him. He believes he has lost her, but in truth, he has lost the illusion. And illusions, once broken, shatter with a violence the psyche struggles to endure. This is why obsession feels eternal to the man, not because the woman is irreplaceable, but because the shadow cannot be outrun. Without her to carry it, it crashes upon him. He calls this heartbreak, yet it is his own psyche demanding recognition. He is faced with a choice: either descend into himself, confront the shadow he has avoided, and grow, or chase another woman, another mirror, another projection, and repeat the cycle. Until he chooses the former, he remains trapped, forever unable to escape. But for the woman, this breaking point is not death, it is rebirth. At first, there may be grief, for even the weight of obsession can masquerade as closeness, and its absence can feel like emptiness. Yet as time unfolds, she realizes what has been returned to her: silence that is hers alone, freedom that no longer feels dangerous, laughter that rings without fear of being misread. She rediscovers the parts of herself she had hidden to keep his storm calm. This rediscovery is individuation, the reuniting of her scattered pieces into a whole self. The Stoics called this freedom the highest wealth. Epictetus taught that no one who depends on another for their peace can ever be free. By stepping out of his shadow, she reclaims not only peace, but power, the power to choose, to discern, to define love on her own terms. She no longer measures devotion by desperation. She no longer mistakes chains for crowns. Instead, she begins to see love as something that expands her, not something that confines. And here her story transforms. She is no longer the woman carried upon a pedestal, nor the woman crushed beneath obsession's weight. She becomes the woman who walks beside love as an equal, not as an idol. She understands now that the love she seeks is not the fire that consumes, but the fire that warms, not the gaze that binds, but the gaze that honors. This is the final liberation. To know that obsession was never proof of her worth, but proof of his unhealed wounds. And in this clarity, she no longer feels compelled to heal him, to carry him, to save him. She chooses herself, and in choosing herself, she becomes capable of choosing love freely, not from fear, not from hunger, but from fullness. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. ChatGPT ko the McLoy, Haikiem tra kach thong tin quan trong.